Imagine standing on the deck of the most luxurious ship ever built. Music is playing softly through the cold night air. Rich families laugh under glowing lights. Couples dream about their future in America. The crew moves with confidence because everyone on board believes the same thing. This ship can never sink. But far out in the darkness of the Atlantic Ocean, something enormous is silently waiting. A mountain of ice drifts through the freezing water directly into Titanic's path. Nobody on board realizes that within a few hours, this floating palace will become one of the deadliest disasters in history. More than 2,200 people are trapped in the middle of the ocean. Dreams, families, love stories, and entire futures are about to disappear beneath the freezing black water. And the most terrifying part of all? Titanic was called Unsinkable. But on the night of April 14th, 1912, the ocean proved everyone wrong. In the early 1900s, the world was changing fast. Countries competed to show their power, wealth, and technology. One British company, the White Star Line, wanted to build something the world had never seen before. The largest and most luxurious ship ever created. They wanted a ship so massive and beautiful that people would talk about it for generations. Construction began in Belfast, Ireland, where thousands of workers spent years building the giant vessel piece by piece. Massive steel plates were lifted into place. Giant engines were installed deep inside the ship. Sparks flew through the air as workers labored day and night. When people first saw Titanic, many could barely believe their eyes. It stretched nearly 900 feet long and looked less like a ship and more like a floating city. Inside were luxury dining halls, elegant staircases, smoking lounges, Turkish baths, expensive suites, a swimming pool, and even a gym. For the richest people in the world, traveling on Titanic became a symbol of status and power. Newspapers proudly called it a miracle of modern engineering. Some people even claimed, not even God could sink this ship. Those words would later become haunting. On April 10th, 1912, Titanic finally began its first journey from Southampton, England. Thousands of people crowded the port to watch the massive ship leave. Families waved goodbye with tears in their eyes, while passengers stepped on board carrying luggage, dreams, and excitement for the future. The ship carried people from every kind of background. In first class were millionaires, businessmen, celebrities, and wealthy families dressed in expensive suits and sparkling jewelry. They enjoyed luxurious rooms, fine food, and grand parties. In second class were teachers, merchants, and middle-class travelers hoping for new opportunities. Deep below them, in third class, were poor immigrants and families chasing a better life in America. Many had sacrificed everything they owned for this one chance. Some could not even speak English, but they carried hope that life across the ocean would finally be different. None of them knew that many would never reach America at all. As Titanic crossed the Atlantic, life on board felt magical. Children played through the hallways, while elegant music echoed through the ship at night. Rich passengers danced under glowing chandeliers, while workers below deck kept the giant engines running non-stop. But beneath all the beauty, danger was slowly approaching. Throughout the journey, other ships repeatedly sent iceberg warnings to Titanic. Messages arrived warning that dangerous ice fields covered parts of the ocean ahead. But Titanic continued moving at high speed through the freezing waters. Captain Edward Smith was one of the most experienced captains in the world, yet the ship never significantly slowed down. The ocean that night looked calm and peaceful, but that calmness actually made icebergs harder to spot because waves were not crashing against the ice. Above the freezing water, the night sky was dark and moonless. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the darkness, an enormous iceberg waited silently. Then came the night that changed history forever. At around 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, lookout crew members searched the darkness from the crow's nest high above the ship. They did not even have binoculars. The freezing wind cut across their faces as they stared into the black Atlantic Ocean. Suddenly, one of them froze in terror. A giant shadow appeared directly ahead. He grabbed the warning bell and rang it 3 times before shouting the words that would become legendary. "Iceberg right ahead!" Panic exploded across the bridge. Officers immediately ordered the ship to turn while engines were reversed at full power. But it was already too late. Titanic scraped across the side of the iceberg. The impact did not feel dramatic to many passengers. Some barely noticed anything at all. A few people even joked about it. But deep below the surface, steel plates had ripped open. Ship. Titanic's designer, Thomas Andrews, quickly inspected the damage, and within minutes he realized the horrifying truth. Titanic was going to sink. At first, many passengers did not understand the danger. Crew members tried to keep everyone calm and told people it was only a precaution. Some passengers continued drinking, talking, and even laughing. But slowly, the terrifying reality spread across the ship. Water was rising through the lower decks, and one horrifying problem became impossible to ignore. There were not enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Because Titanic had been considered unsinkable, the company believed full lifeboat capacity was unnecessary. More than 2,200 people were trapped on a dying ship with lifeboats for only about half of them. Suddenly, survival became a brutal race against time. The difference between rich and poor became painfully clear almost immediately. First-class passengers received information earlier and had easier access to the upper decks where the lifeboats waited. But many third-class passengers were trapped deep below, in confusing hallways and locked gate areas. Families desperately searched for exits while freezing water crept through the corridors. Children cried in fear as people ran through narrow passageways trying to escape. Some passengers smashed against gates in panic, while others became lost in the endless maze of hallways. For many people below deck, Titanic had transformed into a giant steel prison filling slowly with icy water. Imagine standing in a dark hallway while freezing water rises around your legs. The lights flicker overhead. Somewhere in the distance, people are screaming. Metal groans deep inside the ship, like something alive and dying. You run toward a staircase only to find another locked gate blocking your way. And for the first time, you realize something terrifying. You may never get out alive. Above deck, the crew began loading lifeboats. "Women and children first!" Officers shouted through the freezing night air. But even then, many people still could not believe Titanic was truly sinking. Some early lifeboats were lowered into the ocean, half empty, because passengers were afraid to leave the giant ship for small wooden boats in the middle of the freezing Atlantic. Husbands kissed their wives goodbye, while mothers wrapped blankets around terrified children. One father held his son tightly, kissed him on the forehead, and whispered, "Be brave." Moments later, they were separated forever. As the situation grew worse, Titanic's musicians continued playing music on deck. They knew the ship was dying. They knew there was a strong chance they would never survive. But even as fear spread through the crowd, the band kept performing to help people stay calm. Imagine the scene: freezing wind blowing across the dark ocean, terrified passengers crying and praying, lifeboats disappearing into the darkness below, and in the middle of it all, the soft sound of violins floating through the night. It felt almost unreal, as if humanity itself was refusing to surrender to fear, even in the face of death. The temperature continued dropping as Titanic tilted farther into the ocean. The front of the ship slowly disappeared beneath the freezing water, while panic spread everywhere. Some people prayed quietly. Others searched desperately for loved ones. Some stood completely frozen in shock, unable to accept what was happening. Crew members fought to keep order, while engineers deep inside the ship stayed at their posts, keeping the electricity running for as long as possible so passengers would not be trapped in total darkness. They knew they were sacrificing their own lives to save others. Captain Edward Smith remained on board as the disaster unfolded around him. Thomas Andrews spent his final moments helping passengers find life jackets and guiding women and children toward the lifeboats. Neither man survived. Then came Titanic's final moments. At around 2:20 a.m., the massive ship began lifting out of the water. The back end rose high into the freezing night sky, while terrified passengers clung desperately to the railings. People slipped and fell into the dark ocean below. Deep inside the ship came terrifying sounds of metal twisting and breaking apart. Then suddenly, Titanic split in half. The front section disappeared beneath the ocean, while the back section remained standing almost vertically for a few horrifying moments. Hundreds of people clung to the ship as it hung above the freezing Atlantic. Then the remaining section finally plunged into the darkness and vanished beneath the surface forever. But the real horror had only just begun. Thousands of people were suddenly left floating in the freezing black ocean. The water was so cold that the human body could survive only minutes before shutting down. Darkness covered everything. People screamed for help from every direction. Mothers held children against their chests. Friends called each other's names through the darkness. Some people tried desperately to stay above water, using pieces of debris, while others became too weak to fight the freezing cold. Slowly, one by one, the screams began fading away. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. Hours later, the rescue ship Carpathia finally arrived after receiving Titanic's distress calls. But by then, most victims were already gone. Lifeboats floated alone in the darkness, surrounded by freezing bodies, drifting through the Atlantic Ocean. Survivors climbed aboard the rescue ship in complete shock. Some cried uncontrollably, while others sat silently, staring into nothing. Entire families had disappeared within a single night. Out of more than 2,200 passengers and crew, over 1,500 people died. Women and children had higher survival rates, especially in first class, while many third-class families were almost completely wiped out. Husbands sacrificed themselves for their wives and children. Crew members gave up their own lives helping others escape. The disaster shocked the entire world. Newspapers everywhere covered the tragedy. How could the unsinkable ship sink on its very first voyage? Investigations later revealed shocking mistakes. Titanic carried too few lifeboats. Iceberg warnings had been ignored. The ship had traveled too fast through dangerous waters. Safety regulations were outdated and weak. Because of Titanic, Major international maritime safety laws were completely changed forever. For decades, Titanic disappeared into the darkness beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Many believed the wreck would never be found. Then, in 1985, explorers finally discovered it nearly 13,000 feet below the surface. The ship rested in two broken pieces, surrounded by scattered belongings frozen in time. Shoes, suitcases, dishes, and personal items still lay across the ocean floor like silent memories of the people who once carried them. Looking at the wreck felt less like seeing a ship and more like staring into a graveyard of unfinished dreams. Even today, Titanic remains at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, silent, broken, and swallowed by darkness. Yet more than a century later, the story still refuses to die. Maybe because Titanic was never just about a ship. It was about human pride, love, fear, sacrifice, and the terrifying reminder that no matter how advanced humanity becomes, nature can destroy everything in a single night. And perhaps somewhere deep beneath the freezing black water, inside those rusted hallways where music once echoed and dreams once lived, the ghosts of that terrible night still remain.